Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Dwell's inaugural Lunch and Learn, a new forum where we're exploring life in the digital age and how it intersects with Christian spiritual formation. And today we're so grateful to be learning from Dr. Felicia Wu-Song. She is a sociologist who studies the social and cultural effects of digital technologies on community and identity in contemporary life. And how important is that? She studied history, communication studies, and sociology at Yale, Northwestern, and the University of Virginia. And she currently serves as a professor of sociology at Westmont College in Santa Barbara, California. Sounds like a nice place to live and work like that.
Yeah, it's a tough gig. Suffering for the Lord, you know.
That's right. Now, you may know Dr. Song from her important book she published in 2021 called Restless Devices, Recovering Personhood, Presence, and Place in the Digital Age. And I think what I love so much about this book is that Felicia not only highlights the challenges we all face living in a society that is saturated with digital technology, but she also points a hopeful way forward, offering us some practical guidance for living more fully human in our digital world. And so all of this is resonating with the work we're doing at Dwell because we're seeking to build a digital tool that can actually deepen connection with God through Scripture. And so we're interested in all these interplays and connections that could happen from that. So we are eager to listen. We're eager to learn. Let me just give you a quick note on our Lunch and Learn format, and then we'll get started. It's pretty simple. The first 20 minutes, Dr. Song will share with us on the topic of how the digital is shaping our current experience of the human condition. Then I'll jump back on for a quick conversation, asking a few questions, exploring a few connections for the work we're doing at Dwell. And then after that, we'd like to open things up and invite everyone, our full Dwell team, to ask questions, and then we'll wrap things up. So now it's time for me to disappear and be quiet and invite Dr. Felicia Song to teach us at this Lunch and Learn. We're so glad you're here. Take it away, Felicia.
Thanks so much, John.
You bet.
It's really a pleasure to be with you all. The thing I like most about occasions like this is getting to hear from you all and what you're thinking. So I'm going to jump right into things, spin out a few ideas, and hopefully we can spend most of our time in discussion. So in recent years, I've found myself asking this question: what good news does the church have for the weary world and our neighbors? And in particular, what good news does Christianity hold for us who live in this digital age? And so to get at this question, we have to first ask, okay, well, what does living in this digital age mean? That is, what does it look like, or how does it feel? I think many of us know what it feels like to be deeply plunged in the thick rapids of social media and messaging and all of our digital devices. And whether you find it to be exhilarating and fun, or relentless and draining, I think what's amazing to me is, especially as someone old enough to faintly recall what life was like before the internet and cell phones, is how these wildly experimental digital times have come to feel so remarkably normal and inevitable for so many of us. And I think in the past 25 years, what's interesting is that we have all, like guinea pigs, found ourselves participating in a profound experiment, a profound transformation of our work, our social, our communal, and personal lives, as each of those spheres have become highly dependent on the digital landscape. Now, this transformation has brought with it an imperative, right? There's an imperative, we feel it, to keep up, to grasp for attention, to curate our lives in order that they can be broadcast. It's this imperative that leads us, many of us, to lead lives in a state of permanent connectivity. And so that to live in these times where expected to perpetually traffic in emails and social media and messaging, tweets, videos, as a way of demonstrating our worth, our competence, and even our care for each other. And whether our devices are in our hands or within sight, I think what's so interesting about permanent connectivity is that it transforms our consciousness. Our consciousness is being trained, immersed in habits of mind that are unceasingly aware of the fact that somewhere life is constantly being lived elsewhere, right? We've become people whose collective conscious is increasingly one in which no matter where we are or what we're doing, some part of our being is bent towards something else happening online somewhere. And so this growing digital dominance in how we conduct our relationships, how we get our information, how we communicate within all the different institutions we belong to, has occasionally raised concern among a minority of skeptics. But I think on the whole, it's been largely greeted with an exhilaration, a reverence even, that some scholars have called the technological sublime. This profound awe that we have for how technologies enable us to transcend space and time, live ever more convenient lives with easy access to information, entertainment, and each other. So here's a stat that I always find myself pondering. This came out maybe 2 years ago. There's about 30% of American adults that report they are, quote, almost constantly online. Of those 30%, the 18 to 29-year-old bracket, they're clocking in at about 48% reporting to being almost constantly online. And what's interesting is that studies show that the majority of our time spent online goes by with little reflection because they're an accumulation of micro moments in between meetings, in between activities, waiting in line. And so our digital practices are characterized by a habitual, even compulsive kind of usage. And when we consider how the digital media industries have invested in colonizing our attention and searching for ever new and efficient ways to monetize our most human needs for significance and community, it's not surprising that we are almost constantly online because the act of turning to our screens has basically become synonymous with what it means to be connected, to belong to a group. And in fact, the lives we live when immersed in all things digital have this feel and look of not only what is normal, but what it is to be productive, what it is to be relevant, what it is to be responsible, to be successful, even modern or cool. And here I can't help but think about Hannah Arendt in her book, The Human Condition. Back in 1958, she commented on a reporter's characterization of the first successful satellite launch as a first, quote, step towards escape from men's imprisonment to the earth. So here Arendt regards the aeronautics, right, as one in a long line of technologies driven by a wish to escape the human condition. And I can't help but wonder if Arendt's comment from 1958 is still salient today. When we look at our digital landscape, are we so driven to be permanently connected because it is in part a wish to escape the human condition? I think certainly we consider our fascination with the plethora of digital options that promise to liberate us from the uncertainties, inconveniences, and constraints that come with being human, right? Our human condition that has limitations on our physical bodies. When we consider our longing for that kind of technology, we might say, yes, there is evidence of our dissatisfaction with our bodily limitations and our status as creatures subject to the whims of the universe, ever seeking to calm our fears and increase the reach of our control. What do? Well, today we wrap ourselves in digital blankets of unending news and social media updates to keep ourselves warm with the comforts of knowledge. There's the carnival of social media, streaming entertainment online retail that promises to reduce the distance we might feel from each other and offer new solutions to the loneliness and alienation that philosophers, artists, and theologians have long pondered through the ages. Indeed, often it seems we turn to the digital seeking refuge from the harsh realities of our world. When I think about the past few heartbreaking years of pandemic, racial violence, political division, if we look around at the fractured condition of our nation, our churches, our families, our workplaces, in our very own selves, it's understandable that we would want to escape. So many of us carry fresh wounds in need of healing, and with the possible prospects of things still needing to get worse before they get better, what do? Often we run into the beckoning arms of the digital and the social media. It's addictive, in part because it dulls the pain. Reaching back even further, hundreds of years now, to Pascal, who once wrote, "Being unable to cure death, wretchedness, and ignorance, we have decided in order to be happy, not to think about such things." To know that even Pascal, living in the 17th century, had observed our instinct to run away from the helpless disappointments of being human is strangely comforting. It's helpful to remember that we aren't the only ones who have to struggle against the problems of misery and brutality. But what I think is different today is that the digital is really effective at helping us, quote, not to think about such things. The digital realm can offer us a hyped up version of reality tricked out with filters that make it pop and impossible to ignore. Theorist Jean Baudrillard calls this the hyperreal. The hyperreal is glamorous, it's alluring, the product of well-researched strategies, employing both behavioral psychology and neuroscientific insight to keep us hooked. I don't know if any of you have ever spent time playing with the endless filters on Snapchat. You know what I'm talking about if you've done that before. It's absolutely mesmerizing. Our websites and platforms know that we like things that are sexy, that are funny, that are violent. They know that when we get tired, we have little willpower to resist the autoplay of the next video that will start in less than 3 seconds. It is no wonder that we so often pull out our screens and slip away into the digital to escape. So in this way, the digital, I think, encourages us to be people who are living on the run. I think we tell ourselves that we're running in order to keep up, FOMO. But very often, too often, I think we're actually running away. We're running from the pain of being human. We are running from the possibility that sometimes there's no way out, but only through. And so here, back to my original question, what is the good news? I think the good news of Christianity is that it's actually a religion of going through. Unlike what many presume, it's not a religion that offers a formula of escape in exchange for good works or sacrifice. Instead, it promises us the presence of a God who is ready to go through with us. In the incarnation of Jesus, we see how the God of the universe consented to experiencing the human condition of being poor, Palestinian Jewish carpenter son living under the oppressive rule of a foreign power, experiencing the frustrations of injustice. Here, I think of theologian Howard Thurman, writing back in 1949 as a Black man of faith, living in the Jim Crow era, where the promise of an otherworldly salvation in life after death might not be quite enough to soothe the raw pain of suffering the indignities of injustice, physical terror, and social exclusion in his own land. The good news that he saw was that it is this God, right, this incarnational God who allowed himself to be subjected to humiliation and suffering of the worst kind on our behalf, who dwells in solidarity with us when we are in the ashes. So I think at the heart of Christianity is this steadfast promise that God's very presence is what gives us hope and empowers us to go through all that being human can mean. And I think this is in stark contrast to what the digital realm promises us. I think what the digital promises us is maximal optimization. Our digital screens and devices call to us with promises of the capacity to expand our power, expand our influence, achieve efficiency, to get things done. And here I draw from theologian Jürgen Moltmann, reminding us that the good news of Christianity is indeed quite different. He writes this: "The ultimate reason for our hope is not to be found at all in what we want, wish for, and wait for. The ultimate reason for our hope is that we are wanted and wished for and waited for. What is it that awaits us? Does anything await us at all, or are we alone? Whenever we base our hope in trust in the divine mystery, we feel deep down in our heart there is someone who is waiting for you, who is hoping for you, who believes in you. God is our last hope because we are God's first love." So what is the good news? And what is the good news that the church has for our communities and our neighbors? I think being the church can look like helping each other and our neighbors believe and experience what it is to trust in the divine mystery and feel deep down in our heart that there is someone who is waiting and hoping and believing in us. Now, I think at this point, I know that talk of Christ's incarnation and divine mystery, right, can all be lovely and sentimental even for some, but often I think we don't genuinely know what that means, right? Like, what does that actually look like in reality? And when we hear passages like Jesus's invitation to the disciples in the Gospel of John, "Abide in me as I abide in you," right? We hear these words, but we struggle, right? We struggle for genuine understanding of what does that mean to abide in Jesus, to be present to his divine mystery. And if we're completely honest, I think this call to abide in Christ, right, to dwell in divine mystery seems particularly difficult to grasp when our digital lives have largely left us untrained in being able to abide or be present to anyone these days, not even ourselves, never mind being fully present to our God. And more often than not, our attention is scattered by so many of the demands, the various needs and pleasures and obligations that our devices place on us. And sadly, the degree of attention we reserve for our devices' notifications is incomparable to what fragmented attention we give to each other and what fragmented attention we may give to God. I think the 30% of us who are almost constantly online, this world, right, this realm that urges us to perform and hide our weaknesses and compete for each other's attention, right? We have become a people, right, who spend a lot of our consciousness training in not abiding in our God, but abiding in the digital. And it's not surprising, right, that we find that the digital actually abides in us. So this is, I know, a rather bleak conclusion to reach in the middle of a pleasant lecture and lunch. And while we may recognize that we compulsively check our devices in a way that is in some ways an impoverished form of abiding, I think we might actually have something to learn from these digitally oriented impulses of ours. For if we can recognize how deeply we have cultivated a heart of expectancy towards all things digital, then we might be able to begin pursuing a life where we use those same muscles and direct them towards the divine rather than the digital. So here's how I see it. When we live in this digital life, many of us live our days peeking at our devices. We're in a state of waiting, anticipating, sensing that there's something asking for our attention or that there's a word for us from someone, anyone, in fact, through our digital devices. And whether we wait in fear of missing out or we wait in a state of dull hunger, seeking to be stimulated, we go through our days accustomed to having our bodies in one place but our minds elsewhere and engaged in a digital imagination about the thrills and worries of work, friends, or family perpetually developing in the digital realm. Our hearts have become attuned like one of those Jane Austen disadvantaged maidens, right? Waiting in the parlor for the suitor to visit. We hear a notification and it's as if we hear the digital footsteps approaching, and rather than having one's desperation bridled by some Victorian code of refined decorum, we reflexively leap with our fingers to tap on our screens to ravenously devour whatever comes through the door. Indeed, what we have discovered in our digital age is that we actually have a remarkable endurance and capacity to remain in tune with our devices. It is the first thing we greet in the morning. It is the last thing that many of us take to bed with us at night. In between meetings and activities, at any given pause, whether we're standing line or sitting in wait, we diligently tend to our devices. It is always on our minds and our hearts. But why? Maybe it's because we are waiting and searching for joy, for satisfaction, for purpose, for love. We are waiting and therefore abiding in the digital. So what if we were to cultivate the same kind of heart of expectancy for God's desire to speak to us, to commune with us? What if we were to grow in our habits and routines to stretch out our antenna towards checking in with God as much as I am always checking in with my devices? What if the church were to help people grow in this countervailing orientation that directed our hearts of expectations towards God as the source of our joy and satisfaction and purpose and love, the life source of comfort and self-fulfillment and belonging, rather than our screens? Now, I know my time has kind of come to an end, but I want to end with a story that I think might give us something concrete to chew on of what this could look like. It's a story that Emmanuel Katangle tells about Catholic Archbishop John Baptist Odama of Uganda. I think it's really instructive. So the Archbishop is someone who has devoted his life to attempting to forge peace between the government and the Lord's Resistance Army. He's criticized by both sides, but he's beloved by the local people and is known for coming in his flowing robes to sleep on the streets with the children fleeing from the conflict. And Katangle writes this. He says, Odama visits displacement camps, negotiates with rebels, and works tirelessly for peace. He says every day is extremely busy, full of visits, meetings, and negotiations. But on Thursdays, he says, I am not available. No one can meet with Odama on Thursdays. He does not go out. That day he spends alone in a chapel before the Blessed Sacrament. There, every week for an entire day, hidden from public view, Odama detaches from the struggle, adores the body of Jesus, listens to and cries out to God, and returns to his community freshly rooted in a deeper vision. And this Katangle concludes, the public Odama is well known. Yet, there is no public Odama without the Odama we do not see. The hidden Odama points to what it looks like to belong to God and to keep returning one's work and vision to God. So the story, I think, is remarkable. Many of us may not feel like we have the strength to sustain an entire day of departure from our usual routines, but maybe it begins with 20 minutes, maybe it's a couple hours of what practicing abiding in Jesus looks like, not only as individuals, but maybe even for an entire fellowship of believers. And so I think the good news, right, that we have in Christianity is that the good news says, we are people that are embodied, and that embodiment is to be enjoyed, and that the church should be looking like a counter movement, learning to be in our bodies, practicing how to cultivate a hidden self, as Archbishop Odama's example reveals, in order to sustain a public self, to be able to know what it is to trust in the divine mystery who waits and hopes and believes in our suffering. Thanks.
Thank you, Felicia. Those were very thoughtful words and very helpful, I thought. Some really insightful and encouraging points. As a technology founder or co-founder, sometimes it surprises people when I say that I often find myself being skeptical about the marriage of technology and spiritual formation. I often wonder if I'll look back on my career with disappointment because I invested so much energy in trying to make technology and spiritual formation work together instead of encouraging other tactile and less digital ways of doing formation. But then I always am kind of struck with a thought that probably you probably give some thought to this as well, I bet, that what will the world of my grandkids look like? If this is the world we have now, the saturation of digital technology, not just my kids, their world, they're growing up, but my grandkids, what will their world look like? And will we have a company, or will we have a way of being in the world where a model for what it means to live faithfully with technology and media? And so that's why I don't want to retreat this space just yet. I want to try to somehow be a part of the solution, but I don't know if I'm being naive or if I'm being hopeful. But how do you see that happening? How do you see a digital company like Dwell actually playing a part in somehow redeeming the technology that we have? Or do you see it being a help? I mean, can it do that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think one thing that I always hold on to is the fact that the technology that we see today, or that is dominant today, is not inevitable, right? Like, it doesn't have to look or take the form that it does. And I think a big part of our digital technologies, a big part of the culture, is that has a fairly low view of embodiment,
Right?
Right? But to me, it doesn't have to be that way. Like, it's not obvious that those have to be connected, right? And so then the question is, well, then how can we build technologies that actually prompt people, help people be in their bodies and become more aware of their senses, and help them create boundaries for quiet and solitude, right? Right. So again, I think our digital realm tends to just assume that to be successful is to get out of our bodies, constantly be in motion with information and music and entertainment, right? Like this, like constant, and again, it doesn't have to be that way. That's just the model that we're going, that's the path, right? That our commercial digital realm is going down. And so I think there's so many other ways we can build communities, that we can be drawn into prayer, what you all do, right? Bring people into scripture, right? That helps actually consumers and users of that technology to reacquaint themselves, right?
Hmm.
To aspects of their humanity that otherwise is just going down a different path.
Yeah. Yeah. Your point, I thought, about directing our attention
Mm-hmm.
to the divine instead of the digital. You know, we want to run away from whatever that
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable feeling is that we're experiencing. But it reminded me of a quote from Evelyn Underhill where she said, directing our attention, or I'm sorry, she said, attention to God is the primary religious act.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love that, attention to God. And then you think about how some scholars say we're living in the attention economy, where we're,
Mm-hmm.
our attention is what is up for grabs. It's what's for sale. It's what people are trying to get. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like directly competing with
Yeah.
the religious act of giving our attention to God.
Yeah.
Simone Weil said that prayer is the orientation of all the attention of which the soul is capable toward God.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me want to think of ways that Dwell can help people focus
Mm-hmm.
their attention, even if it has to go through
Mm-hmm.
our digital platform toward God.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't hear you saying that we have to be Luddites, right? That we have to abandon technology,
Mm-hmm.
but is there a way to actually use it or harness it
Mm-hmm.
for directing our attention toward the divine? And have you seen that anywhere happening,
Mm-hmm.
anywhere that's
Yeah.
hopeful or encouraging?
That's a good question. I mean, I think as you were speaking, I was thinking maybe one of the puzzles to figure out for a company like yours, if is to think about like how do you build something? It's like the best thing that you can do is to be a set of training wheels, right?
Yeah.
Like to get someone on a bike so that they can feel like steady enough to ride it. But the goal is to get the training wheels off so they don't need you in the end.
Right.
Right. But there's still a market for training wheels. Right. And so, I mean, in some ways, right, like I think like whatever the puzzle, right, the organizational puzzle is like how to be a facilitator of bringing helping them curate their attention towards God, right? Instead of some social media, set of numbers of followers that you're seeking, right? But to be training them enough so that they don't need you anymore, right? That's scary. I don't
Yes.
know how that works. It's kind of a built-in obsolescence of sorts, but it's I think
It's subversive, isn't it? And counterintuitive in the
yeah, yeah,
marketplace. But I wonder if you're
right,
not right that there always is a market for a kind of training wheels. Um,
right,
and so
yeah,
not needing to continually grow and almost hoard the audience,
right,
but
yeah,
being able to say, here we are as a digital
yeah,
product to kind of point your attention to the divine.
right,
And once you move on from that and you build that skill, that habit, that discipline, then
right.
hey, it's that's great. That's really our mission. And in fact, we're even building new experiences for Dwell that are all wrapped around scripture. I'm thinking of one specifically called breath
Mm-hmm.
prayers, where we
Mm-hmm.
actually use the words of scripture but breathe in and
Mm-hmm.
out the prayers.
Mm-hmm.
They're like
Mm-hmm.
5-10 minute practices
Yep.
that encourage or that just really teach people how to do it. And they
Yep.
can actually do it with a guide. But
Yep.
then at the end of all of our breath prayer experiences, we say, these are designed to go where you go.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't even need the app for this.
Mm-hmm.
They can travel wherever you are and you can engage in them whenever you feel like it. And so
Yeah.
I do think it's really something for us to think about at Dwell and really continue to work towards that direction because we do want to point people
Mm-hmm.
to the divine and not just the digital.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think about like the whole industry of consultants, right? I mean, the best consultants will come in, right, and help an organization work out what needs to get worked out. But the best consultant isn't going to be there every 2 weeks to help, right? Like then the organization's not fixing itself,
That's
right?
right.
Like the organization has to be able to work itself out.
Yep.
But there is surely a thriving consulting,
Yeah.
industry. And so I think there's models there. And I think that, even when it comes to, the strengths of technology, which in the networking capacity, right? Like to bring people together, right? I
Hmm.
think the strength of it is that it can start, right? It can start things, but to be able to start something and then let the people, help them carry it out
Hmm.
elsewhere,
Right.
right? I think the best vision for full relational, right, experience.
Yeah. And digital technology can support that, can
Exactly.
foster that,
Mm-hmm.
and in a way, it's
Mm-hmm.
helping us become more human in a sense because
Mm-hmm.
now it's aiding us instead of stealing our attention and making us
Mm-hmm.
almost less human.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the pandemic, COVID-19, and so many tragedies with that. But one positive that seemed to come out of it was almost the learning that we need embodied relationships, that the digital
Mm-hmm.
actually won't satisfy.
Mm-hmm.
I think I felt that. I think people felt that this
Yeah.
isn't how we're designed to live. It's not who we are. We're designed to actually be embodied and be embodied together in
Yeah.
places and
Right.
geography.
Right.
So I wonder how you've kind of seen that work out post pandemic. Has it been
Mm.
a kind of catalyst for more embodied ways of being together?
Um, I think that process is going to take a bit of time.
Yeah.
I think, like you said, a lot of people recognized something about embodiment and the pleasure, right, of being in the same room with other
Mm-hmm.
people, and the what's holding up our capacity to just like jump into that, right? And here's my my sociology self coming in, is just that, like as individuals, we might have desires,
Mm-hmm.
right, and insights,
Mm-hmm.
but we live in a landscape of institutions and structures.
Mm-hmm.
And until those institutions and structures can catch up to those insights, right? And build, like it has to rebuild something different and
Mm-hmm.
something new,
Mm-hmm.
right? That can capitalize on that insight. So even for example, so I teach, right?
Yep.
And glory, hallelujah, students and teachers are so thankful to be back in the classroom over doing Zoom,
Yep.
right? I
Absolutely.
mean, everyone recognizes that it's better, right?
Yep.
But it is really easy for me as a teacher to just fall right back into my old habits
Mm.
of teaching, like all the, decades of teaching things that I did,
Mm-hmm.
right? And not integrate like new things that I realized during my time on Zoom.
Yep.
And why don't I do that? Well, that takes time and creativity and space to build something new. And then I think people are also, I don't know if you see this around you, is the long tail on COVID and the effects of the pandemic. I mean, I think we are way still on the early end. Like
Right.
those years were just really rough in
Mm-hmm.
so many ways that we don't even fully see yet,
Yep.
in our schools, in our churches, in our workplaces. So I think at least what I see around me is we're still fairly in triage mode.
Mm-hmm.
Right, we're all still trying to like, okay, like we're still alive, we're still doing this. But how are we doing this? It hasn't even quite figured. We haven't quite figured that out yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. I hope we have a long memory on the pandemic and that we don't just, I understand the desire to just throw it out
Right.
like not think about it
Leave it
anymore.
behind. Yeah.
I'm with everybody on that. I don't want to think about it either.
Right.
But hopefully we'll remember the things that the truths, that we did come to.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thanks for answering my questions. I know we probably have some other questions from our Dwell teammates. I think my identical twin brother Josh, who is also co-founder of Dwell, is going to ask a question and hop on the screen. You will notice that we don't look like twins anymore because we have two different hair philosophies.
Okay.
But our voices will still sound similar, which is interesting for twins. Let's see if he can pop on here real quick.
Hey, thanks so much for the conversation this afternoon. It's been really insightful. Love to listen in, and really, really good stuff. So I wanted to ask you about digital community, just the whole concept of digital community. If you've seen healthy ways of doing that, we are in the future talking about trying to build a communal component into the app. And there's some exciting things about that, but there's also, some treacherous things to think about, when you let people have a chat feature. And so we've been exploring ways, over the years, like how could we do that in a really healthy way? How might we make it more and more embodied?
Yeah.
So I guess, my question is, what advice would you give us for building healthy community in a digital space?
Mm-hmm.
Or pitfalls that you've seen to avoid?
No, that's a really good question. So I think the best digital communities are the ones that, like I said before, do eventually have some way of bringing people together in person, whether that's once a year or in different regions of the country, that create that forum for people, and that people
Mm-hmm.
are eventually, being able to expect that and enjoy having spent time online together to then be in person. Um, I think in terms of managing the um, the day to day, shall we say, of digital communities, I think the main thing that's different is that from digital communities and say bricks and mortar neighborhood communities, is that digital communities are highly porous, right?
Mm-hmm.
Easy entry in, easy exit.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and that brings with it lots of dynamics, right? Of accountability or lack of accountability, safety in space, and intimacy and trust that can be cultivated or not. And so I think trying to be fairly intentional about what you decide to build on the parameters of like, what do you require of people, right? In terms of what information they give over, what their commitment is to the group, apart from whatever kind of rules of play, right, that you set up. I think setting up those membership parameters and y'all knowing exactly what that could mean, right? Because they all have costs and benefits, right? High barriers of entry make it so that no one wants to come, right? And so it's trying to figure out, right, that nice balance, right, that invites enough people to want to join, but that are committed, right, to using the space and being a part of the group in the ways that y'all see and hope for it to be. But I think again, I guess depending on how you're imagining these groups, if it's like one big group or small groups, I think being intentional about, right, not only the barriers of entry, but then if you do decide to do different groups, trying to, and I guess it depends on what the purposes of the groups are, right, is to also be intentional about naming who's in the room and who's not in the room. I think that's really important, whether it's a homogeneous group or a heterogeneous group, right? So that everyone and y'all are always just kind of aware of where the dynamics can go, whether it's homogeneous or heterogeneous, right? And kind of always trying to keep your eyes on the prize of where you're trying to head.
Yeah.
Those are just some quick thoughts that come to mind.
That's great. Thank you. I'll
Yeah.
let somebody else jump in here.
Thanks.
Thanks, Josh.
Hi.
Jen.
First of all, I just absolutely loved hearing from you. I did read your book, and I often read a book with a pencil in my hand. And I just have so many notes. And I'm just like, I'm so thankful for the work that you did. So I told them, I was like, I'm just going to kind of fly by the seat of my pants here. Like, I think I agree with you in that. I think one of the things that I really appreciate about your words is that your book is not a like, do these steps or, you know, switch out your smartphone for a flip phone and like, you'll be free. It's so, it's so much more than that. And just really grateful. And I think like, so back in my earlier years, I was a photographer and I did film photography and digital photography. And I remember even like making the switch from digital into film, and you know, with the digital camera, you just kind of like you just click, you don't think at all about what you're doing. Like you just do it because you can, right?
Yeah.
With film photography, there's a cost. There is a cost to everything you click, and you have 16 frames on that roll of film. And so you need to think. You need to think before you set up a shot. You need to think before you click. Is it worth it? You know, is this worth it? And so I like heard so much of that approach in your book on like, think, like, you know, like, in all aspects, not just like what it is doing to you in the moment, but like who created it, the intention behind how and why it was created, which I think, John, like that's what I think is so lovely about what we're doing at Dwell is like there is thought and intention. Like we're not always right, but there is thought and intention behind what we're doing, and that we genuinely want people to learn how to dwell with God and how to abide. And so I think, you know, for those that haven't read your book, there's some Freedom Project. There's just all manner of things to go through there that is just, it's just a process. It's a process, and it's not a 10-step program. Like it is a life process. And one of the things that I specifically have loved and has just even talked with our family about is just truly thinking about, one, why I go to my phone, and two, like how it makes me feel during and how it makes me feel after. And like one of the things that I have always, I know that I am somebody who is far too easily pleased. I know that I think it's in the book of Jonah where it says that those that cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. And I know that that is like my propensity to go after those worthless idols. And so as a result, I'm always praying over myself, like in your presence is fullness of joy, at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. And it's so poignant, like in the midst of like all this, like media, right? And so if I truly believe that there is joy, like God promises joy, God promises pleasures. And so thinking about how I physically feel when I pick up my phone and during and after, I have noticed just like a tension that I've honestly never even realized I was carrying before until like I worked through some of the things that you encouraged and challenged us to work through. And so I know that maybe not all of us, and we can certainly finish this as a group, continue this conversation after, but I just didn't know if there were like any quick little nuggets that you could give to people that perhaps like haven't had an opportunity to read all the way through your book, obviously not giving too much away, but you know, like just those little exercises that maybe you could encourage us to do as individuals to really think, even just like what you gave, you said the 30-minute practice that you give your students. If you wanted to share that, I loved that. I thought that was so great and something like very tangible and relatively easy to fit into a day, you know? So if you just wanted to do that, but
Yeah, sure.
I absolutely loved your book. And I'm very,
Thank
very
you.
thankful for just the way you
Yeah,
wrote it and how you
I'm so
brought
glad.
scripture into it. And I think that, like you said, I mean, it's certainly not training wheels, but it is kind of in a sense, right? Like you're leading us to experience God, and all that he has for us. And that, yeah. So anyway, if you wanted to share any of those, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Really
Yeah.
appreciate that. I'm so glad. It's been helpful. Yeah, so so the 30-minute thing that you mentioned, I'll start there. So what I have my students do in the middle, or 2/3 into the semesters, is we just I tell them to, I live in Santa Barbara, so we can do this anytime because it's always sunny and gorgeous. Is I tell them to leave the classroom, and I send them out with these questions: What is my noise? Why do I hurry? And why do I hide in crowds? What are the crowds I hide in? And ask them to just even I actually dialed it down. I dial it down to 15 minutes now.
Okay.
15 minutes where they just got to find a rock to sit by, or just out on the path or under a tree, and just stop, right? Most of my students, when they're 2/3 into the semester, they're just like, they're just driving fast, right? As fast as they're pedaling as hard as they can. And they stop for 15 minutes. And I ask them just to answer those questions for themselves, and then to pray and with whatever it is that they come up with. And I think, what's behind most of the exercises, or what I call experiments in the book, that I suggest is really trying to try something new that shifts our routines, right? So many of us have routines, and they're good. We have routines because we don't have to think about them, right? Right. And that's efficient for our brains. We can't expend energy all the time. But when we are not intentional, when we're not thoughtful about why we do them, we can be training in something else that we don't even realize, right? Towards some ends that we don't want to go towards. So one of the experiments I actually like a lot, and I always keep trying it, is monotasking.
Yeah.
So monotasking is the countervailing practice to multitasking, right? And I'm a working mom, so like multitasking is just like what I do all the time, right? And so monotasking is just doing one thing when you're doing it and being really present in that thing. And I think monotasking is just fascinating to me because it is about like becoming more aware of the thing you're doing, becoming aware of your body, the place that you're in, the people that are around you, right? Instead of kind of having your brain working at like 3 tracks at once, right? And again, opening yourself up to the questions of, what am I seeing? What am I noticing? Am I feeling anxious? Am I tense, right? Like, what is going on in my body? And then bringing that into our prayer life. And so I think that I appreciate, Jen, that you didn't want the 10-step plan or whatever. I
There's
really
plenty of
appreciate that.
those.
Yeah, because I hate those things, so I fail all the time.
That's right. And it's just not real. It's not sustainable.
I failed by step 3. I've totally failed. And so
Totally.
I talk about experiments because I love experiments, because experiments never fail.
That's right.
Every experiment you do, even if you don't get to the place that you were thinking you might get or hoped that you can get, you still get data.
That's
And
right.
that data, right, is so valuable, right?
Mhm.
Even if you, quote, fall on your face, that's
Mhm.
important to
Yep.
realize
Yeah.
and accept and say, okay, Lord, like, what is that about, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that's what's so exciting and generative. And I think experiments is also not about self-reform,
Yeah.
not about self-improvement,
Yeah.
which I think is always the trap for followers of Jesus, right? That it just becomes another self-improvement plan.
Mhm.
But rather, experiments is about opening myself up to the reality of God and tasting something new that I
Mhm.
may not have tasted before. And I really believe that when we taste that new thing that is so beautiful, so delicious, we're just going to come back because that's how we're created,
Yeah.
right? We have
Yeah.
appetites. And so that's what's exciting too. And it's
Yes.
organic and it's generative, right? Like nobody needs the plan. You're
Nope.
just going to want it,
Yeah.
That's right.
right?
Yeah. So
Mhm.
good. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Jen.
Okay. Tanner, you've got a question. Love to hear
Yes.
from you.
Felicia, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. This has
Sure.
been awesome. I too, like Jen, I've been listening to your book, and it's great. So thank you for your work. And one thing that I've noticed in how your work differs, I've read Cal Newport, Digital Minimalism, right? I've read
Mhm.
you cite John Lanier multiple times. I've read his stuff. I've watched Social Dilemma. Personally, I've really curtailed my own use of social media. And yet, for people who are in this space and have done all of the normal things, right? Deactivate notifications. You mentioned putting your phone on grayscale. There's all these different things you can do. There's still this like dissatisfaction that people just kind of deal with.
Mhm.
And your book has helped me see that it's not necessarily just the kind of digital ecology, as you call it, but it's also this larger thing of the industrialization of life. And you mentioned these two kind of pervasive sources, namely the drive to quantify and the drive to perform.
Mhm.
And when I thought about that, you bring up McDonald's as kind of like the pinnacle of quantification, right? You can drill everything down into it takes this many seconds to make a hamburger, this many seconds to make a milkshake, and you can really just make everything so efficient as to just
Mhm.
do away with any spontaneity or any randomness.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering how you suggest, because while a lot of your work is focused on how we relate to our digital tools, how you think beyond our digital lives or the digital tools we use in this balancing act that we all have between structure and spontaneity, or if you want to go the Jordan Peterson route, right? Order and chaos. And I know it's not a new thing with Jordan Peterson, but he's really brought this theme into kind of the modern uh, understanding. So how would you think about that balance?
That's such a great question. I don't think I've thought about this very much, so I'm just gonna have to just throw things out there that hit the top of my brain here. Um, I think um, I think of structure as so maybe this is I'm going to borrow from like good parenting advice, right? So good parenting advice is that all our kids need structure. Every child needs some kind of structure. If you live on a street that has traffic, it is good to have a fence, right, to protect your child. And it's good to have that child abide the purpose of the fence and not climb over it, right? But by putting up that fence, what are you doing? You're creating space for the spontaneity, right? Like you're creating the safety so that spontaneity can happen. happy chaos can happen, right? And so I wonder, I don't know if you have a specific area of life or society you're thinking about, Tanner, but I wonder if there's something similar there, where like creating order and structure is essential, actually, for creativity and spontaneity to emerge out of, right? And I think, you talk to writers or poets or musicians, it's the same thing, right? It's like there are rules of composition, there's rules of meter, right? That you might start with, right? That we start with, but then it's those parameters that we then feel able to play with, right? And to do cool things with, or even a chef, right, understands there are certain rules of chemistry that are just going to dictate how the food comes out, right? But once you understand it, right, like knowing it is actually essential, right? And if you've ever let a young person just go into the kitchen and just make whatever, and I've done that before and it tastes awful, right? When they have no understanding of what it is that they're mixing together, it just looks cool, right? But it's like if you have an understanding, then and that's the structure part, right? Then there's really beautiful things, right, that you can grow and develop. So I guess that's a bit schematic, but maybe that's something that would be helpful as you're thinking through what you're thinking through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things, if I may, just ask a quick follow-up, is a lot of people, we're all obsessed, or, a certain subsection of our society is very obsessed with, like, what is name your famous CEO's daily schedule, right? And then it becomes, I tried out Mark Cuban's daily routine for 21 days. And it's like, that's not the point, right? Like that's actually not the point of why he has a routine. It's not so that you'll copy him. Yeah. So I think we all kind of want to emulate what others are doing, because we think, oh, Mark Cuban is being very efficient, so now I'm going to go and do the Mark Cuban thing, and not that actually being one of these, like, kind of industrialization moments that we all experience in our life.
Yeah. That's such a great example. I want to know what Mark Cuban's routine is. Yeah, that's funny.
Well, thank you. I know I didn't really end with the question there, but thank you so much. No. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, one last question. I know we're bumping up against our time from Trip. This can be our final question.
Dr. Song, thank you so much for your time. I feel like with the last question, I need to give you a zinger of some sort. Really, really make it difficult on you.
I don't know, that one was pretty hard.
That's true. Okay, well, this will be maybe slightly easier. So if you could hear the rest of our team, they'd all laugh at me right now, because I've been throwing all week in different meetings. I've been throwing around a Wayne Gretzky quote, and I know nothing about hockey, so it's ironic. Okay. But he said that with hockey, you need to know where the puck is going, and you skate to where it's going, not where the puck is. And I thought of that with your book. And I want to ask you about generative AI. So that's my zinger. Because I was thinking on your book, it came out in 2021, and talk about an ever-moving puck. I feel if you were writing this summer, you might incorporate that in ways that you didn't even just 2 years ago. And so it's in some ways cruel for people in your line of work, because as soon as you can complete your thought, there's something new you have to wrestle with. And so I was just curious, your thoughts on that. I seem to daily come across some article about ChatGPT or AI art generation, or cloning our voices, whatever it may be. All these tools just even 6 months ago weren't on our radar. And I last week was showing a few of these to my father, and his line was, as I showed him and as I was creating a few things, he said, "It's like you're God in Genesis 1." He said, you think it and it comes into being. And so I guess my thought, it could be general. If you were writing today, what thoughts would you have on this surge of AI, and what does it potentially do as far as our aims to remain human? What does it mean to be human in the age of AI? Yeah, so take that where you will, but I'd love to maybe just incorporate that into some of this discussion.
No, that's good. Yeah, no, I appreciate your recognition of the occupational hazards that I have to manage. That is a reality that is ever present. I think my view on AI and meta and whatever else is coming down the pike for people of faith is actually the same. I mean, things will keep changing, and AI is just the tip of the iceberg, and so I think what the church needs to do is get really rooted in what we understand being human is. Because whatever the new technology is, it'll always be sending us into some kind of tailspin, right? Which is why we just need to anchor in and be like, okay, what are the key things? Embodiment, relationality, right? Whatever it is, right? And whatever faith, within Christianity, whatever tradition, right? Ecclesial tradition, whatever it is, right? You got to root yourself into that and grow in that, rather than getting super specific and prescriptive about each thing, because by the time you figure it out, it's going to be the next thing, right?
Right.
As for AI, and even as I think about, the book that was written and the book that I would write now, I think I'm going to slightly dodge, I think, the core of your question by saying something that I hope will actually be an interesting kind of seed to plant, we're all agog over AI because it's something that we as users can have access to now. But AI's been around, and AI's been used in a lot of under the hood ways, right? Already, deep into the structures of the way that society, insurance, just the ways, especially massive systems, right? Automated systems. So it's nothing new. I think the thing about AI that is actually more concerning to me is the degree to which we think that, how to put this, every bit of data and information that the machine learning is premised on is data that exists from being collected from all of us. It's what the internet is, right? ChatGPT is just spitting out what is in the internet.
Right.
The internet is obviously not a direct representation of reality. Parts of it come close, right? But there are lots of it that are super warped because it's filled with all of our voices, right? Everything that we've said. And so I think it's so important to remember that it is a mirror rather than an oracle, It is a mirror. And I think holding on to the reality that it is a mirror means not only that the information that it's building its learning on is not objective, it is not neutral, it is highly biased and value-laden, just as all of our society is. It also means that it's privileging certain voices over others, just as the internet does, right? And so, for example, the one piece that I've been pondering, I have never written on it, but it's something that I probably should write on because it keeps bothering me, is facial recognition technology, right? So facial recognition technology is not perfect. It's very imperfect, actually, for particular faces, women's faces and people of color's faces. Why is that? Because facial recognition technology has been created by and trained on white male faces for the most part. That's just a social reality, right? And so to the extent that facial recognition technology gets looped into AI systems, right, and employed, now we have a problem, right? Because when the AI systems are being employed across the board in society, in a society that already has inequalities, now we've just, we've really spun it out in a way that is highly troubling and potentially very damaging, right? And so I think being super aware of where the data is coming from and who is building the system, not like who individually, but just the reality, right?
Yeah.
Of who our technologists and scientists, engineers are, and being mindful of that, to me is actually more on the ground things we need to work out before we even get into the kind of transhumanist conversations.
Right.
Because it's gonna hit people's lives fast, if not already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Well, that's probably a good place to stop. Thank you so much for being with us today, Felicia. This was very, very helpful, insightful, and thought-provoking. You've given us lots to think about. So very grateful for you to be here. I want to give you any last thoughts or words that you have for us at Dwell.
Well, it's just been great being with y'all, and I'm so glad I got to talk and meet some of the folks that are with you. Last words for y'all. I love what you guys are doing. And I think it is a tricky, tight wire walk. But what part of life isn't, right? So I appreciate your courage in that, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness and intentionality that it just feels like y'all have. My hope is that, and this is the hope I have for all digital technologies, and this is the part that I wish I had brought into the book more, is that we'd be building technologies that are mindful for everyone, that is inclusive of everyone, and finding ways to make it accessible to all different populations to benefit from, I think is probably, the next big challenge for so many makers. So that's, I'll leave that as a prod.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we'll have to do this again maybe sometime soon. This is awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. A real pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me.
All right. You bet. Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.